Hello and welcome to another edition of the Franchise Tag. I am Gareth Smith, and today I'm joined by Jonny from Off the Grid. How are you doing, Jonny?
Hi Gareth, love to be on. A busy week, but yeah, it's been made good by having some football to watch, which is always
It
a positive.
has. And that's why we're here today, really, because I know the NFL season has finished. The Super Bowl is done and dusted in the rearview mirror. And we're not quite ready for things like free agency or the draft yet. But there is new football in town. We have the XFL, which had its first week this week. How did you find the opening weekend, Jonny?
It was a roller coaster. It really was like a new format of watching American football is always going to be an exciting thing, whether or not you like or dislike the rules. It's just an interesting watch, and that's why I found this weekend. I think the XFL as a concept, such a great way to try and bring new fans into the game, and it's had its ups and downs as a model for the sport. In 2020, obviously with COVID, that was unsuccessful. Its original inception as well, which didn't get off to a great start. But I think now, if the complete remodeling that has gone into it, it looks like a very exciting prospect. And the weekend, the whole seemed to be a great success, I think. It was just great to watch, and look forward to seeing the games and seeing how it progresses over the next few weeks.
You mentioned XFL 1.0, which obviously I watched. Don't know if you've seen that documentary, I think it's on Disney Plus, about XFL 1.0. How that one ever came about was just beyond me. No such thing as a safe kick. You couldn't call a fair catch. The players fighting for the kickoff that resulted in constant injuries. But there were some things from that initial one that we now take for granted in the NFL, like some of the camera angles which they used. You mentioned XFL 2.0 as well, which I'll be honest, I think if it wasn't for COVID, that league might still be going today, because that league looked like it had a real good shot. But XFL 3.0 is with us, and we started off with the Vegas Vipers versus the Renegades. That one, I think you'll agree with me, by halftime, it looked like it was going to be a very one-sided display, because Louis Perez came out, was scoring touchdowns here, there, and everywhere, and Renegades just looked like they couldn't get anything going. But by full time, they won. How did that come about?
Oh, it was absolutely crazy. I mean, this was the opening game of a completely new franchise model of American football. And honestly, the twists and turns are probably nail biter of a finish as well. Like you say, I think Perez, just a game of two halves, really. I think obviously one of the notable differences between this and the NFL is quality, but that doesn't mean it's any less exciting. Perez, did he score? Was it 2 touchdowns in the first half within the first quarter or so, and then going on to throw a handful of pick sixes for the rest of the game. Yeah. It's just such a topsy-turvy league, but it we saw on Twitter fans coming out, and which included current NFL players as well, saying just how exciting and such a good watch it was the opening weekend. And I think the opening game was such a good advert for that. We had the rules and the new rules come into place. People who hadn't necessarily been aware of that. These coming into the season would have been a bit shocked to see what's going on here. Why are the kicking team and the returning team lining up so close together? Or what, a 4th and 15 onside kick? What's this? Yeah, it was crazy, but really, really exciting, and full credit to the getting the name, the Renegades. Sorry, for winning that opening game. Commiserations to Vipers. I thought, looking at their team, they could be a bit of a dark horse this year. But wasn't meant to be the first game. But we'll see.
You mentioned them at the back of their squad. I think one thing we need to take into account for a lot of these teams is the fact that they've literally had 5 weeks of training camp together. They've had no pre-game scrummages. So you're going to have these like teething problems early on with these teams. But when you look at that team, they've got the likes of Vic Beasley playing there. They've got Lewis Perez, who's seasoned in the alternative leagues. They've got Martavius Bryant at wide receiver. They have got some well-known. They are going to be a good side this year. And they've got a Hall of Fame head coach in Rod Woodson, who I can imagine that defense to get better as the season goes on as a result. I think what I found particularly interesting about that opening game is because, as you mentioned, it was getting to know the rules. How did you find that different onside kick? Whereas in the NFL, you don't see it, the kickoff, you don't see that in return much. In the XFL, they all were pretty much. How did you find that new variant of a kickoff?
Yeah, the kickoff, obviously, the first point of the game, it was. I mean, I obviously read and knew what was going to happen, but when you see it, it was like, wow, this just looks incredibly strange and what's going to happen here. But I really, really like that rule. I think I was reading the NFL return rates in 2022 was around 40%. In the XFL, it's over 90, which just shows for a league that's trying to make itself exciting and bring in new fans, those sort of little tweaks, they don't want to see, the touchbacks or, kicks that aren't returned. It obviously adds the excitement value of seeing teams potentially going on to return the first play. But also I think from a safety point of view as well, I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago talking about this, and I think over the last few years we've seen a few times on the opening plays where people get injured, whether that be twisting a knee returning or simply running full throttle blocking within the first minute, which obviously impacts the game from the start. I can see the reasons for that as well, but overall I anything that that makes it more exciting, I'm all ears for.
And I had a feel of rugby league about it when the kick returns, I thought, because you have two banks of teams, and there was basically they were running straight at a line of players, and it felt like rugby league because the teams were moving in a line to make the tackle, and there was 2 or 3 guys making it whenever it was on the return. Which, as someone who's passionate about my rugby league, I don't see that as a bad thing, having a game, rugby league being emulated in American football. Taylor Rossellino had a very good game, the kicker, who, friend of the show, has been on. If you haven't watched it, going to plug it now, obviously. He was perfect, 3 for 3, and they went on to win. The next game we had was our first blowout of the XFL, in all honesty. You had the Houston Roughnecks versus the Orlando Guardians, and sadly that game didn't look close. Early on it did, because Paxton Lynch drove the Guardians down the field, and we had quite an interesting touchdown in that one. Was it a touchdown? Wasn't it? Was it an interception instead? But what was really interesting was listening to Dean Blandino and the referees analysing and coming to that discussion to why that decision was made. How did you find being able to hear the ref reviews?
Yeah, I think it's something that, I mean, like I say, I'm passionate about other sports, rugby league, rugby union, and hearing that sort of, the NFL's pretty similar, the officials command respect. It's not like, unfortunately, we don't want to get into talking about another sport like football and the officiating, or, the potential abuse that referees sort of face. But I think it adds, that extra sort of element of respect that, obviously the referees are accountable, officials are accountable, and for everyone to hear, the processes of making decisions, I think, makes it for a better spectacle for their point of view. I think it commands that sort of respect. We've criticised the NFL this year for the officiating, and particularly off the back of the Super Bowl as well. I think this was, coming into the XFL, I think this was probably one of the biggest sort of talking points. And I thought, it wasn't just, we had female sideline refs as well at the weekend, which was, great to see.
Yeah.
Completely, diverse squad of people. And yeah, I'm all for it. I think they did a great job in reviewing that particular play. And yeah, I'm all for any, making, as a fan, you want to know exactly what's going. The thought process of people, whether that be officials or players. So yeah, all for it.
And to be fair, that was what I thought was quite interesting in that sense, in the fact that if they couldn't make a decision, you actually heard them go, we can't see enough here to do it.
Yeah.
Which sometimes as a fan, it frustrates you going, I can see something. But if the ref, you actually kind of categorically hear the ref go, can't see enough to overturn it, it kind of gets rid of that anger. And you mentioned the Super Bowl. Being an Eagles fan, that's still a bit of a sore subject, so thanks for bringing that up. But at least there's the option to challenge a flag that you don't agree with, which again is a very, very interesting rule that I'll be honest, wish the NFL had not too long ago as an option. But then we move on to our fourth game of the weekend, which now that wasn't a tale of two halves. That was a tale of 3 quarters and 1 quarter, or even 3 quarters and majority of a quarter in 2 minutes. Like how the Battlehawks won that game, I do not know, but that wasn't half an example of showing the rules to its maximum potential with the 3-point after attempt and then the 4 and 15 on your own 25 to retain the ball in the fourth quarter. If that wasn't an example of how the XFL is exciting, I do not know what is. What did you think of that game?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Battlehawks overcoming a 12-point deficit in the space of, what was it?
2 minutes.
A minute and a half. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, yeah, like I say, like you sort of mentioned, seeing the 3-point plays and the 4 and 15. I mean, this is perfect for the XFL. Something a league that's just trying to create as much excitement as possible. But can you imagine being 20 points up? If you're say like the New York Jets and you're 20 points off with 2 minutes to go against the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, and then all of a sudden he comes back and scores 2 touchdowns, 3 3-pointers, and then 2 4 and 15s. Can you imagine that in the NFL? That would be the biggest killer.
It just screams of Chargers or Falcons, doesn't it?
Exactly.
If that rule was in the NFL, it just screams of Chargers and Falcons all day long.
So if Roger Goodell, if you don't get any ideas, because I think I'm less keen on those, but yeah, I think, like you say, the Battlehawks, they were a team who I thought, again on paper, they're going to be up there, and in the first half, San Antonio showed complete dominance. I thought there was no way. I had no idea how the Battlehawks won that game. So credit obviously goes to AJ McCarron, who's a respectable former NFL player in his own right, and showed that he's a very talented player in those last couple of minutes. Which it's a huge win for the Battlehawks. I think they go on to play the Sea Dragons, isn't it? That's tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah, on Thursday.
It's Vegas, Seattle on Thursday. I think they're up against. Who are they up against?
Oh, sorry. Yes,
should really look at this, but
it is. Yeah. I should have looked this up as well.
I'm surprised I didn't, but yeah.
But no, full credit to the Battlehawks. But we'll wait again to see if we have another one of those controversial onside kicks, because if I was a fan of San Antonio, I'd be livid.
But to be fair, the atmosphere in the Alamo Dome looked phenomenal. It was the biggest attended game of the weekend. Over 20,000 fans in there, and the atmosphere in there looked rocking. It looked like San Antonio's proper embraced, because it is a city that kind of needs a franchise. How positive was it seeing the fans in San Antonio fully embrace the XFL?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. I think this was definitely the best atmosphere of the weekend. It was, a very raucous atmosphere, with, obviously the team performing for majority of the game as they did. It's a big sporting city. They've got great franchises in basketball, and just been calling out for some some football noise, I think, over the years. But yeah, I think compared to the other sort of games, we've obviously talked and praised the XFL for attracting fans, but there were a lot of empty seats, which was obvious, and I think that's natural though in a new tournament. But yeah, I think that's obviously a challenge that they're going to face. It's difficult to recruit people, particularly on the back of such a huge NFL season. I mean, obviously every season's huge, but we're less than 2 weeks gone from the Super Bowl, which was one of the best ever. But yeah, I saw something around that the average price of an XFL seat was around $110, which I thought was quite expensive. I mean, if you compare it to for some NFL games, if you can get them last minute for that sort of price or less, and coming to a new sport, you're not sure what to expect. Seats aren't full. I just thought, that's something that I think, the tournament officials are going to have to look at a little bit, because it's not great.
To be fair, they've got some cheap deals on as well, because obviously I've had various players on, so you always talk about what the games have got coming up and what the availability looks like. But some of the stadiums have some dirt cheap tickets. Like, you can get $18 to some games, and like some of the stadiums had season tickets for $100, which is ridiculously cheap.
Yeah.
But as you say, the really good seats are going to obviously demand a higher price. Yeah. But it depends where people are willing to look and where they want to sit and all that kind of stuff. And as you say, it's a long season, and that some of these cities, as I say, having or American football franchises already in the NFL. You got some fans who've spent a season ticket already, like to Houston. Don't get me wrong, they've supported the Texans all year, so having a winning franchise might be a nice novelty and lead to them wanting to go to those games. DC as well hasn't really had success in the NFL for a long time, so a good, successful franchise in the Defenders there, I think, would come in really handy. And obviously, I think less said about the Raiders in Vegas, the better when it comes to what goes on with that team. So there are some potentials for some of these cities to have fans gravitate towards these, because if you have winning franchises, you're naturally going to get fans in the stands.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like you said, the demographic, the geography of where the franchises are based on, Houston, Vegas, like you've mentioned, they're just crying out for a bit of success in the football field. So hopefully they can attract fans to come and support and hopefully see some winning football.
And the last game we had on the weekend was the Seattle Sea Dragons versus DC. Now, these were two teams go into the season I had as potential championship rosters. I really like what DC have built with some of the players they've got on that roster. I really like their running back room, their QB room. I quite like how that roster's built. And same with Seattle. And Ben DiNucci in that one showed exactly the player that he was on that opening drive, going down the field and more or less doing a Mahomes-esque flick out to Josh Gordon, who those two names alone are probably the biggest names in the XFL we've got right now. But DC won out. And again, that atmosphere looked really good. There was controversy in that game. I don't know if you saw the beer snake was taken away from the home fans and led to free the snake trending on Twitter come Sunday, which is always a worrying hashtag to be seeing on anything. But yeah, free the snake was trending. Again, that atmosphere looked really, really good. And it looked, I keep mentioning rugby league, but it looked rugby league-esque with it wasn't packed stands, but what was there looked entertained, loud, and enthusiastic. DC fans, I think, also brought a lot of noise to that game, and I'm curious how that franchise will look. What did you think of that game in particular? Did you pay much attention to that one? With it being very late Sunday night for us.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously I think it was the most eagerly anticipated game of the weekend. You've mentioned Josh Gordon, Ben DiNucci for the Sea Dragons. Big NFL names in their own right to an extent, and the defenders as well have got, two big sort of teams coming up against each other. So the game that it's obviously the defenders ran out and won the game in the end at 22-18, I think it was. But the Sea Dragons, I think in the first half were the dominant team. They seemed to be in rhythm. Ben DiNucci, obviously, who we've mentioned. I think that the game-changing moment was when he threw that pick six in the third quarter, and the defenders, went on to win the game. Is it King, the quarterback for the defenders?
Yeah, you got Jordan Tamu, who ran in the first touchdown. Who, again, an episode I've done, so make sure you check that one out. I need to stop plugging these in this episode, don't I? Trust me, go over to franchise tag look at the franchise tag overtime, and you will literally see a lot of the players I've accidentally mentioned and name dropped in this have been interviewed by myself. So John Tamu, he ran in for the first one, and then King came in for the second one.
Yeah,
he looks real good, dual threat quarterback, very mobile. I remember someone describing him as Jalen Hurt light, just because he's dead quick and mobile, but not quite. Obviously, it's Jalen's level, but yeah, he looked really good when he came out. It is going to be interesting how the teams adapt, because there are some rules which we haven't really seen used much yet. Like, in XFL 2.0, it was used quite a lot, was the 2 forward passes as long as they get past the line of scrimmage, which led to a lot of teams deploying 2 quarterback sets. We haven't seen that yet, but I wonder whether we will over the next few weeks. So
that's
overall
one of the rules that I've been looking forward to seeing, because it's what I mean. I looked back at 2.0 and some of the plays there, and it just looks a mile away from what you sort of expect. So that's an interesting play. But yeah.
So what did you think of the coverage overall? Because ESPN were involved, so they didn't have small-time regional, where some of these other leagues which do appear don't quite get the power of ESPN behind it. How did you find the coverage overall?
Yeah, I think it was hard to get away from the gambling advertising on the broadcasts, which I'm sure many fans are okay with, but at the end of the day, this is an unknown sort of entity, and encouraging people to bet on things that they don't really know. We had no idea who was going to win, who was going to what was going to happen really. And I think it was just it just added to the encouragement to put a bet on when you saw
the third game was particularly bad for that. Like, literally, if they'd have mentioned, if you had to have a shot every time they mentioned, if you'd bet on the over versus the under, you'd have been hammered by half time. Because they must have mentioned it all the time. Every time a drive ended, it was like, oh, if you're betting on the over right now, you'll be worried. It's like, can we maybe drop that now? We get it. There's gambling. There's always gambling involved in sports. But do you know what? You don't need to constantly go on about the overs and the unders all the time. And that's that was one of the negatives. I did think that they were pushing that a bit too much. I think you're right there. Some of the interview timings were random as well. Like, I remember when they interviewed Taylor Russolino was just about to kick off. And they literally stopped him for an interview, and I was like, because I was speaking to him afterwards, and I was like, I bet you just wanted them to tell him to go away. I just want to kick this ball now, and he just laughed at me because I was like, just a random time to interview someone when they're about to kick it off.
It was in the first game as well. I think the Renegades ran in for a touchdown. I can't remember who it was. And yeah, the reporter just sticking his microphone, didn't get any words whatsoever. I was like, oh, come on, give him a sec. Give him a sec. He's just scored a touchdown. He's going mental with his celebrations, and you're trying to get a word. It was crazy, but we're seeing a lot of sports doing this. But obviously we can hear the officials. We want to hear the players as well. So
yeah,
maybe just
don't get me wrong. I did find that quite fun, but it's always the same. It always makes me laugh after the Olympics, particularly. Always makes me laugh because they do the same thing. Someone just ran 100 meters in like 9 seconds, and they'd literally just finished, and like, how did that go? And it's the exact same thing as what they had there with the touchdown.
We want to see.
But I do like.
These, yeah. Sorry, just intrigued by all this player talk.
I don't get me wrong. I did like some of the side, and I did like the fact that you heard all the play calling, because not that it means anything when you hear them saying those random word combinations, unless you are proper knowledgeable, which sadly I'm not. But it was interesting to hear them being called, and the fact that they didn't cut off their headsets with like 15 seconds to go, like the NFL does, so they could. Because what you saw happen was offenses changing the play call because they looked at how the defense lined up. But I thought that was really interesting as a dynamic, and something that the XFL has obviously a different insight to the NFL. Is that something you think we could see in the NFL?
Yeah, 100%. I'm actually surprised that it's not happened already. I think it just creates, more of the cohesion, required for good football. I think that the whole aspect of being able to hear the sidelines is something that people like to see in the post tweets or clips afterwards or during the game. So I can definitely see that continuing to the NFL. Perhaps it is even I think better timing wise is perhaps interviewing coaches during the game. Perhaps talking to a quarterback or an offensive coordinator when they're not actually on the field. Could be a good sort of solution. But I think it's all about timing. That's the thing. Got to respect these people are doing their jobs, and are probably quite annoyed if they're constantly getting asked to do little interviews, particularly if their team's losing.
Don't go to the QB straight after a pick six and go, what went wrong there? Because obviously it's not going to go down well. And it was just the one that jumped out. Oh, it was. But the one that jumped out to me was just, you could just see on like Taylor's face as he was stood there almost. You could always see him go away, I want to kick the ball. And it was like, why are we doing this just for a kickoff? I think these are things that will get ironed out as the season goes on. They'll get better at finding those moments. It's because bearing in mind that these TV crews, it's their first time doing this approach as well. So that's obviously one of the negatives about some of the random interviews, but at the same time, it was good at the same time. It's one of those situations. Is there anything that you think the XFL should worry about from week one?
I think it's just keeping up with, the consistent. We've had a really good opening weekend. I think it's been a real success, but being able to sustain that, obviously The Rock, Danny Garcia, Redbird Capital have thrown an awful lot of money, and I know an awful lot of money has been thrown into it in the past, so they need some sort of some good return on investment. Obviously, the attendances at stadiums is relatively low. And opening weekends could that potentially be the peak of where we go? I hope not. I hope they can just continue trying to fill stadiums as best they can. We know the quality is not as good as the NFL, but that means it's more exciting because you get those plays where no one knows what's really going to happen, and obviously the added rules make it an even better spectacle. So I think that side of thing, the on-field thing can take care of itself. It's just how it's sort of marketed, and they have to be different to the NFL and other leagues, because it is an experiment. and business model at the end of the day. Yeah, I just really hope it continues the way it has. It was really good weekend, but yeah, we'll see.
It's one of those things. I think the American football does need a development league, because when you look at over here, particularly talk about with football or rugby or all that, there's never just one division. Like, how many players have we seen gone from bottom division to top division in football pyramids? Like, Jamie Vardy's a classic case of a player that, if he was in American sports in the NFL, he would never had a good career, because he wouldn't have had a career.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a pathway like this, and the likes of the XFL, whether it be USFL, whether it even be indoor leagues or fan control league, if that's still around, I'm not entirely sure. But there needs to be another avenue for players to make a living from this sport. And the amount of athletes that go through college year in, year out, and then come to the end, there needs to be an option. And I think this does seem a very viable option for players. And completely, I do hope it does continue.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, sometimes when people, I've spoken to friends who are perhaps interested in other sports, and they ask about the NFL and, that sort of development sort of league, because it's so, inclusive, once you're out of college and you're not in that circle of the NFL, it's so incredibly hard to get back in. And, in other sports, we see so many different stories of, obviously they are quite rare at the same time, percentage sort of wise. If you're down at the bottom, it does take an awful lot to get back back to the top. But in the NFL, the pinnacle of American football, once you're out, it's so hard to get back in. And if the XFL can turn into a prime development league where players who perhaps gone undrafted or had whether that be injury, form, sort of decline during their career and just need some time to play football, to catch the eyes of scouts and teams from across the league, then that would be absolutely fantastic. And I'd love to see more of that sort of signing. NFL teams coming to sign XFL players and give them a chance. It just makes for a better model, I think, as a sport.
And when you look at the XFL 2.0, you had the two names, obviously, that jumped out and have played NFL snaps and starts have been Taylor Heineke and PJ Walker. You do wonder, obviously, which players, obviously, we can't say it after week one which players they're going to be, because sometimes you have those players have a freak first game and then they go on and do nothing first season, or they have an absolute nightmare first game and go on to have an amazing season. But I think it's just going to be interesting to see how the league develops. Obviously, we've got some interesting games this weekend, and they begin tomorrow night with Seattle versus the Vegas Vipers. It's Seattle's chance to host a game. Now, their fans are quite passionate, and I'm expecting there to be a decent number of them. I know it's hard at this point, but if you had to pick a winner, who are you going for?
I'll go for Seattle. I think, like you say, I think this is going to be the atmosphere that everyone's sort of been looking for. It's a raucous stadium anyway, and I think just having another game of football there, you can't really bet against the Seattle team at home. So I'll go for the Sea Dragons.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'll do the same, just because of the fact that they've got their fan base is quite passionate and quite big, and I don't want to upset them early. But also as well, I can't bet against some of the players they've got on their lineup. They've got obviously some of the more household names in the league, and they did demonstrate, albeit in a losing display, but I still think they will be a team around there or thereabouts come championship time, end of the season, at the Alamo Dome, as it was confirmed this weekend as well. But overall, I think successful first weekend for the XFL, and something I think we're all looking forward to week 2. Jonny, thank you very much for your time today. Very much appreciate you coming on and speaking with me about the XFL and the upcoming season. Thank you very much for listening at home. I'll be back again soon with another episode.